Welcome everybody to Spin Right. Today we're talking about Phoenix. Is that what we're talking about?
We're talking about the Phoenix, yes.
Okay, good. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Spin Right. Today we're talking about the Dark Phoenix.
Yes.
Or the Phoenix, or the Phoenix Force, or Jean Grey gone bad.
And the untold history that's been found out in these books. No, not that book, not Morton Meskin. In Alter Ego, and then interview with Louise Simonson, and interview with Walter Simonson, and Jim Shooter, and Dave Cockrum, rest in peace. So it's going to be some stuff that going to be hard to believe for many people. But we all know one of the biggest comic stories of the 80s was the fate of the Dark Phoenix, right? By John Byrne and Chris Claremont. And the two of them were struggling with the character.
And so they've made movies with this, right? I mean, this is
going to be
huge. It's been in the comics, it's been in the cartoons, animation. They made movies. Now they're making a second movie with the Dark Phoenix movie for X-Men.
Yes.
So we thought it was a good time to come back again and talk about what the untold story is about Dark Phoenix.
Yes.
You know, Phoenix, of course, was a. Can you explain to us a little bit more, Petey? What exactly was a Phoenix? And
well, the Phoenix actually was Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum decided they wanted to up Marvel Girl's powers, give her a new code name, give her a new costume, and do the Thor equivalent of a mutant character. So what they decided
they wanted to make her a god?
No, just in power level.
Okay.
So they decided to have her die and be reborn as a Phoenix. But as you see in the issue 100, X-Men 100, it gets hit by cosmic rays the same way the Fantastic Four get hit. Mm-hmm. So that's going to say take her mutant power and times it by 100, and then you get
not 1,000,
maybe 1,000
or a million.
But that's the thing. They upped it to almost it could be infinity, because she saves the universe soon after.
Okay.
But they decided they wanted her to be like a heavyweight, and they shot a little farther than expected. So
celestial level?
We don't know yet, because she beats a Herald of Galactus in her first fight. She saves the universe in the next story. And then something happens to the X-Men. Dave Cockrum leaves, and John Byrne joins. And John Byrne is like, she's way too powerful. She's making the X-Men fifth wheel. So what he said, let's have her put psychic breakers to pull the power down. And then when they fought Magneto beats her, and we were like, wait a sec, how did this happen? And there's some limits to her power. But we just saw her save the universe.
Right.
So then soon after that, she's out of the book. Byrne has worked his magic and got her out of the book.
Goddamn Byrne.
He's gotten her.
Burns
No,
people.
the X-Men are globetrotting. And Jean Grey and Professor Xavier think the X-Men have died. So this is a year-long story. They're going traveling. They meet the Alpha Flight. Whole bunch of things. Sunfire.
Another Byrne title. Clearly interweaving it with the mythos of X-Men. But we won't talk about that again.
But soon as she returns, I think they said behind the scenes, they're both going at it because Byrne and Claremont are going at it because, Claremont is a fan. It's the character he created, and Byrne is saying she's too powerful. So they run into, I think Chris Claremont runs into writer Stephen Grant, Punisher fame. He says, why don't you turn her into a villain? You can do whatever you want with her. So that said, Claremont tells that to Byrne. Byrne was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's do that. And now we'll put Mastermind sort of be the guy who would help with the White Queen to bring out the dark side of the Phoenix and opening Pandora's box, and we don't know what's here. So at this point, she goes bad, and then Chris Claremont adds in that Phoenix is also the Chaos Bringer, Ravager of Worlds. So,
before we go there, I mean, how did the White Queen take out the blocks? How did they discover the blocks and take them out?
They don't know. They don't actually know that there's psychic barriers. What's the name? They just put a mind tap. So Mastermind's illusion can be projected right into Jean's mind, not knowing that this is, keying into, connecting with a darker element in Jean. He's thinking that he's connecting to Jean. Okay. And at this point, Jean is originally Jean is not, there's no Phoenix entity. But way they worked it and what Chris Claremont added, that the Phoenix was an entity of itself as this story progresses. So they're making her an evil character. And Jean would be this thing that was possessed. And there's hints of it in the story, but it's not major. But they just talk about the Shire knowing about the Phoenix before Jean and saying, oh, this is what we feared.
So the Shire, the alien race?
Alien race that are connected to the one Xavier's love, Lilandra, is from the Shire, and they have a history with the Phoenix. The Phoenix goes out into space after trashing the X-Men, going bad and trashing the X-Men. She goes out into space, she devours a sun or star, but Byrne got to the page, and the thing is supposed to be, she's the star, the Shire shoot at her, and she kills the Shire people. She kills them after they shoot at her. And they say that, Shire's like, we got to do something about it.
Right.
But Byrne looked at the page and saying to himself that, what they'd come up with and say, she's not really that bad because she just ate a son and the Shire shoot at her. So something has to happen for her to really go bad. So he draws a panel of the asparagus people that are from the Bari that are from Avengers #4. And he has these asparagus people in one panel so you see them get burned out, and Chris Claremont adds, some even ups the ante in the description of that. And Jim Shooter sees this, but he doesn't, initially say he has issue with it. The next story, Jean fights the X-Men again, comes back. Xavier comes, put new psychic breakers in Jean's, and they stop the Phoenix. They're able to stop the Phoenix. But the Shire comes. They had this big fight.
One of the three great empires, galactic empires, along with the Kree, the Skrull.
Yes. So then the Shire come, the X-Men lose the fight in honor of Jean. Jean is supposed to be wiped and stripped of the Phoenix and all of her psychic powers gone and basically put to a point where her mind didn't have psychic powers. So while that happens, Jim Shooter sees it and says, no, this is not dramatic enough. You guys got to up the ante. And Chris Claremont and Byrne, they're like, what is he doing to us? We told him what we were planning, and now he's saying no. He's like, well, you killed these people. And it's like his offer was for them to torture Jean for forever. And Byrne was like, oh, I'd rather kill her. So he tells that to Claremont. Claremont tells it to Shooter. Shooter says, okay. And they go about the business of killing Jean. And it's the biggest story of the X-Men up to that point.
So what made Shooter change?
What? No, he wanted her to be tortured. And once they said she would die, and he'd already done the death of Feral Lad, so he understood the death of a character or a hero, or a hero turned villain having this heroic moment where she kills herself. So it was like, it's something in line as something Shooter would like. He just had the idea. I mean, Shooter tells the story that Byrne and Claremont really didn't want to kill her. They were hoping he would back out. But in this thing right here, if you look at this book, Phoenix, the Untold story, Byrne and Claremont sort of argue about who did it. and Byrne says, no, Chris, you did. Earlier in the day, you did it. And he's like, no, that's not what happened. He said, I was on the phone with you and you said, I'm not doing this nastiness to her. I'd kill her first. And then later they disagreed. He's like, Chris Claremont said, I did it. And then Byrne's like, no, you didn't. You said, what did he say? He said, you said she eats a star. I added the people. So it's like, it's a collaborative process. So Shooter's in there a little bit.
But at this stage of the game, how popular was the Jean Grey character? So this whole death in the Phoenix Force at the time, how did people take that reaction to it?
It was more word of mouth. In the comic book stores, it was a big thing. On the newsstand, it wasn't as big, but the word of mouth of this happening was big.
Because it was a very popular story.
Yes, yeah. So it wasn't a big seller. It wasn't. I think the top comic was probably like maybe close to 300,000, and X-Men was selling about, that issue they said sold about 175,000, but that was big for the X-Men back then. But it was talked, when I was in school, that we were talking about it, just the idea of not having the comic in hand. Only one friend of mine had the comic, but it wasn't one he was bringing in. Because, one of us, us lowlights would probably try to steal it or something like that. But I'm the smart man, because that's what happened to me. I lost my X-Men 142, and I got it back, and then got stolen again from my house.
So so the death. They start going on this whole death.
The death is a big thing. It starts propelling the X-Men to become the top book. And Chris Claremont is constantly playing this out, having moments where people remember the death of Phoenix, where it was a kitty sort of disguises herself as Phoenix. They do a fantasy story where the Phoenix shows up. There's even Carol Danvers turns into Binary, which is sort of like a Phoenix. And
Carol Danvers is?
Well, that's Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, all that stuff. Okay. She joins X-Men, but it's like for a short period. But there's always this instance of death. Like even in the Days of Future Past, the X-Men die. There's always the Brood Saga. There's a hint of death. This idea is coincide of this, the real death of Phoenix sort of would pay off later when Xavier almost died. All this elements of drama that you feel you couldn't trust. You had to worry about these characters because Jean died. And then some point later, which we've talked about before, Jean comes back in X Factor. And Chris Claremont is very upset. There's many fans say this totally destroyed everything they did in the X-Men, bringing Jean back, and destroyed the stories, and this is a terrible thing just to do these mutant hunters and this, that, and the other.
Why was she brought back, though?
Because they were bringing back the original X-Men in one title, and to help the book, it would help be a push of saying this character that was popular, it would come back.
So there was no demand, you think, by some of the people who buy the comics to want to see the story played out?
I think,
or was it just something Marvel was like, hey, it worked once, let's try it again?
No, I think who was it? Bob Layton, who was a writer of X Factor, wanted to put Dazzler in the book. In my mind, Dazzler wouldn't have worked in the book because she had a relationship with Angel and Beast at separate occasions. So you introduce her in there, and she has this casual sexual relationship with these two guys. Then it sort of shifts the book into what is this book about? She gonna get with Iceman or something like that. So, and then I think Chris Claremont offered up Jean's sister, but this means she would take a human character and turn her into a mutant, which I'm totally against. So, everyone has sort of said, apologized to Chris Claremont and said, oh man, how could they done this to Chris? I think Louise Simonson has said this, that, and the other. But we have some truths that we had to bring out. We had to bring them out.
The untold truth.
Well, we go into this book, which
what is this book?
This is by Roy Thomas, Alter Ego. The issue number is 24.
And Roy Thomas was?
Roy Thomas is writer of the Avengers, the X-Men, and he was a comic book historian.
And he was the editor?
Editor-in-chief of Marvel, the guy who said, let's do the new X-Men. So in this book, they talk about the struggle of, at different points, there we go, where are we at? So in this book, we're also talking about that Shooter had to deal with, at points, Chris Claremont coming to him with ways of bringing back Jean. And Chris Claremont was like, no. And Jim Shooter was like, no, as long you can do this story, but as long as it's not Jean. Like, yeah, you can have this character, but as long as it's not Jean. And that seems like it would be, he means Madeline Pryor, who Cyclops married. But he was saying, who was, his wife and...
Madeline Pryor was a...
What do you mean? A Jean lookalike.
Exactly.
So it was like, he's saying here, basically not directly saying it, but saying there's points where he was trying to bring the character back. And Jim Shooter was like, no, but you can do that as long as it's not. So you have Rachel, who has a Phoenix power, and you have Madeline Pryor, Rachel is the daughter from another timeline who had the Phoenix power.
Also the Hound, wasn't she?
Well, yeah, they added that she was a Hound and all this stuff to get some angst and all that. But she gains the Phoenix power. So the Phoenix power is back. Then we have someone that Scott marries who looks just like Jean, who actually...
She, clone, right?
Well, they didn't introduce she was a clone, but she was in a plane crash the same time Jean died. So it's like really pushing the envelope.
And Cyclops ends up marrying her.
And he marries her after 7 issues, which I was like, it's totally out of bounds. So here we go. This leads to another thing that it became an issue when Byrne's proposal was the one that was approved. And then it was like, no, we can't. It ruins the whole story if we bring her back.
Yeah, it does.
But the thing is, the other problem is that Chris Claremont wanted to bring back Jean. And Dave Cockrum also says that there was constant point in the plots where Chris Claremont was thinking, that's how we bring back Jean. There's a character that was in the Futurians, Sunswift, when he looked over Dave Cockrum's shoulder and he's like, oh, this character for Futurians, that's how we bring back Jean. She goes from the future, the Phoenix Force is still alive, and he comes back just because she's that much in love with Cyclops. And like, no, this is for the Futurians, which is my own creator stuff. And then he saw Binary, and he was like, Jean, yes, we can do a Jean story. And then they're like, no, this is Carol Danvers. Oh, okay. And then they move on. So there was points where Chris Claremont was thinking about bringing her back.
But why? I mean, was he so wedded to the particular character that he felt that it had to come back, or was it needed in the X-Men? I mean, because that's one of the things you've heard, that when Jean died, it kind of changed the whole dynamic of the crew.
It added, but the thing was, there was portions where Chris Claremont wasn't happy that, he wasn't initially happy that it was forced on him. Neither Byrne nor Claremont really wanted her to be a bad guy, but they did it, and then they were like, they got the success, but ultimately, if Byrne wasn't on the book, there's a chance that Jean would have never gone through the death of Phoenix, because it came out of their struggle and them topping one each other. So
right, but there's two parts. There's her going bad and her dying. Mm-hmm. So because her going bad means she has to die, I don't necessarily know about that with Magneto.
Well, the thing is, if when they played it out in the Untold story, had she not been killed and she was in the book and Shooter let them do it the way they wanted to do it, at the end of the story, maybe when Magneto shows up, she probably would have been exited the book entirely. Or they could have decided on her dying when they, fight Magneto in issue 150. So the death is coming, regardless if it happened in 137 or 150, or she just exits the book, because the plan was, her turning bad was that she was going to be reduced to like a 5-year-old, but she's in a adult body. So like everyone looks at it and says, oh, this is a happy ending. Like, no, it was going to be her going back to her parents' house, her, being, basically an invalid, and they have to care for her. And there's no marriage. There's just Cyclops being in, the person he loves is in, her mind is sort of gone. So it wasn't going to be a happy ending, but obviously the death of Phoenix was much more dramatic at that point. And so you're saying it's going to come in 150 is not as dramatic as it happening when they did it. So it makes the short story short, tight, and concise.
So they bring back Jean Grey, the Phoenix Force, and X-Force. So tell us about that.
Well, we've talked about that before. They don't bring back Phoenix, they just bring back Jean. And this has been a sore on the side of fans and Chris Claremont for years.
But though it's one of the most popular ones, though.
No, I think bringing her back wasn't, because it was such a negative thing towards, the X books themselves promoted that X Factor was a bad idea. Like within there, the X books are saying, like the X-Men are saying, this PR campaign is bad. Okay. And then Bob Layton's not on the book. As they go along, they keep saying that it's bad. Anytime you bring it up, it's bad. So it's like we all, the premise is the premise of them acting like mutant hunters and then training mutants. The whole part of the training mutants is the important part, that they're saving these mutants, having some alter egos, and then they're stopping, mutants from dying, which was happening a lot at that period, which led to the mutant massacre. So ultimately, for me, having her back led to the originals coming back to the title, and then when the X-Men get to their hugest success with Jim Lee, the originals are in the title. So as much as I like the death of Phoenix, so much stuff happened. As much as I like the death of Phoenix, so much stuff happened in between the death and coming back to her coming back after X-Men 201. So it's like there's so much changes that happen. Why, like the Days of Future Past stuff is going on in there. There's no story that was just closed off. Everything has come back. Characters have even come back. So it's like, why am I going to worry about this ruins? It doesn't. I read those stories. They explain why Jean is here. But the thing that I want to stress is that, Chris Claremont also wanted her back, and he rewrote Byrne's Fantastic Four issue 286. So you can't. I have these books here. Have Walter Simonson saying that this is that Madeline Pryor basically was Jean with no powers. It's the same character. He marries Scott. This one, Shooter says a couple of times that Claremont brought over a proposal to bring back the Phoenix, and he's like, well, as long as it's not Jean. And ultimately one got through, and same with the lookalike. And then Dave Cockrum said the same. So she's coming back. I just want to, but then ultimately, they did other stories later. Jean somehow they merged Jean and Madeline, and then she got the Phoenix power, which they should have never. The thing is, like, you can have the death of Phoenix as long as Phoenix still died. But then having Rachel around, giving Jean Phoenix's powers, it's like none of that's to me was. I guess it's like what's it, 601, half a dozen or the other. That sort of thing. It's like it's whatever you like, and most people want to say, oh, they should never brought it back. But ultimately, there's so many changes in X-Men from that. For me, I was sort of out of the book, and then when Jean comes back, this is something that at least can get me back to the book. So that's my long and short of this.
So, here are a couple questions for you.
Uh-oh.
Again, I gotta say, the Dark Phoenix is one of the most popular titles or story arcs in the X-Men universe.
Yes.
It seems all of them, basically, or most of them have been, where you've had the original one with Jean Grey, the retcon when she comes back and becomes the Dark Phoenix, and also others being able to utilize the Dark Phoenix.
You mean like the Avengers versus X-Men, where the Phoenix comes back and empowers 5 of the X-Men? That's what you want to go to?
I'm just saying.
You want to go to the movies, as you said earlier? You want to go to the cartoon, the multi-part cartoon of the Death of Phoenix, of recreating that story?
Yeah. So it seems that this is a story that continually wants to be told or reinvented. But what is, in essence, the Phoenix Force? What, in essence, pre-retcon and after retcon, what is it?
Pre-retcon is that there was some cool lines of dialogue that led to the Phoenix being more than what she was. When they wanted to do the rebirth of having her die, this power that's in her, even though she gets radiated by the cosmic rays, she dies and she comes back, so that's why she's renamed Phoenix. But then it's like, she says, hear me, X-Men, I'm no longer the woman that you knew, I'm power incarnate, and all this stuff. And they're like, the readers are like, yeah, it's cool, but where did that come from? Like, where did this stuff, what is she saying? What does it mean in the costume? And the readers are writing in that, and they're like going forward, because it's like the X-Men are a freight train. Like, so much stuff is happening in those early Cockrum issues. You're just like, wow. Oh, here, Cyclops' father is out in space. So it's so much stuff they're just throwing at you. But they were saying that the readers were asking those questions. So as they went along, that's when you get that Phoenix is an entity and she's a ravager of worlds and this stuff. And then at some point, it's post that, I think when they brought her back, Chris Claremont sort of retconned it that the Phoenix entity was a benevolent entity. And then it interacts with Jean, and that causes it to go bad. So if you put those things together, but you can't, there's elements in the actual story, the pre-point that negates it being a benevolent entity. So that's where it...
Such as the Shi'ar.
Well, not just the Shi'ar with the Shi'ar comments and that, the aspect of, if you say it's a benevolent entity, and it wasn't, Jean just went bad, then it's like, then why is they saying Ravager of Worlds, like the creature of legend, and this sort of thing. So the way they retconned it when they brought her back, what they planned to do, where it was just a bad entity, Chris Claremont X'd that out and forgot that Mastermind is the guy that sort of pushed her to become. You don't get Dark Phoenix without Mastermind. She wasn't going through a thing where she was struggling with her power because it was too much power. It was Mastermind pushing the envelope, pushing her and saying, "Oh, this is her darkest fantasies." And we're just pushing at it. Oh, whoa, this is more than I expected. So
I mean, couldn't it always the way they show it in the comics and not comics in the movies and the cartoons is that, you know, she always had a little bit of a dark side, but she always played the good girl. And then, you know, after a while, you know,
there was more.
Mastermind connects to that, and it's like boom.
There's more. They wanted Jean to have more spunk to her, and Chris Claremont's women to always have a little more to them than some of the other female characters in the Marvel universe. But that's where they were even writing that Cyclops is like, she's like, her personality is the same but it's different. And am I in love? I felt her die, and now we have this new person that's hugely powerful and extremely confident. It seems not exactly the same. Right. So there was hints of it being her being possessed or being different that you could play to, but people were like, no, she just went bad. You had to remember, it's so much happening as they were going. So it's kind of, so much is happening as they were going, so you can't necessarily point to, well, this is, continuity is like a straight line, because you have Byrne coming in there, changing it a little. They would have never put any psychic breakers into her head. They wouldn't have pushed her out of the book. They wouldn't have fought to get to the point where, you know, making her a villain, like later, planning to make her a villain, which didn't last too long. So it's
So again, what is the Phoenix Force? You said it's a benevolent, or what is?
I said it before. Before there was no actual Phoenix Force. It was just a hint of something that happened before.
But now, what do they consider?
Now they consider it a long-lived entity that's old as Odin or any of the gods in the Marvel universe.
And what type of entity is it? Is it a destroyer of worlds?
There's so many different. At some point, they had it that she was connected to the cosmos. So when Galactus tried to eat her, saying this is a force I should take out, the stars were going out at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it was like, okay, so she does have some importance to the galaxy. So then later, when Alan Davis was writing Excalibur, Phoenix has gone through a point where Rachel has lost her mind. And the Phoenix is the only entity around. So she runs into Galactus, and Galactus is devouring a world. And she fights Galactus and beats Galactus. Galactus is weak at this point. She's like, I've done it, and it's wrong to eat these worlds. And then Galactus says, no, I eat to survive. You take energy from worlds yet born. And the Phoenix is like, oh, I didn't think of that. I know I've had the connection to stuff. I didn't know where my energy is coming from. That's why she could beat Galactus in a fight, because he also has no stop for energy because she's drawing from an unlimited source. So this causes the Phoenix to cut the power down a whole lot and go back into Rachel, and then Rachel leaves. Now I can't really tell you what they did. All I can tell you is that Jean Grey got the power at some point. Grant Morrison, well, there was a breakup between Cyclops and Jean, and Grant Morrison connected Wolverine and Jean dies, reborn as a Phoenix, and then they kill her, and then she's gone. And so I can't really tell you what she is now, but she was an entity that drew from energy that was yet to be born at one point. But it's, constantly changing, which is crazy with how comic books work. I hope was that a closer answer to the question? Or was it
definitely
off?
Helps a bit, PD. But it's not exactly what I was trying to get.